Module 4. Transit and Transshipment. Which agencies are responsible for regulating arms transit and/or transshipment?
For the Philippines, transit and transshipment, and in general border security, really is the business of customs. But nothing in the Philippines is really ever the responsibility of just one agency. So there's customs, and then there are other agencies who are involved, such as Coast Guard, the ports authorities, local government, the police, especially if it's arms related. It's always the police, the military, Department of National Defense, and other. So it's an interagency effort, and there are about 10-15 agencies that you have to get together in a round table in order to get the answers, especially for transit and transshipment policies for the Philippines.
Is the relevant legislation located online?
The legislation for transit and transshipment, it isn't really up to the standard of the ATT yet, but the one that we have is available online, not on a government website, but there are certain online databases that provide this. But there are agency policies that support also that legislation, because it's, in general, it's a customs code where transit cargo is defined. And then we also have an upcoming bill that aims to implement about 95-98% of the Arms Trade Treaty, where transit and transshipment are clearly defined, not just in accordance with the ATT, but also in accordance with certain export control regimes, such as the Wassenaar Arrangement, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and so on and so forth. So it's available, but certain policy directives have to be requested from customs or other specific government agencies, with the bill that we're proposing in Congress to define it according to ATT terms and, add additional requirements, especially for the criteria.
What measures does your state take to regulate transit and/or transshipment?
Because certain items are controlled by different implementing agencies. For small arms and light weapons, it's the National Police, and they give the directives. For conventional arms, it's the military. So it's a bit peculiar for the Philippines, because while small arms and light weapons, the government gives access to certain civilians or other specialized civilians with occupation or jobs that require the use of small arms and light weapons. The conventional arms is for the exclusive use of the military and national defense. So there are certain directives, like, for example, for small arms and light weapons, definitely the documentation requires end user agreement, details about the end user, such as the name, the company information, the background, the end use, the quantity, the model, the type, the item, so on. It's descriptions about the item in general. But for the military, because the only agency in the Philippines that is allowed to use or procure conventional arms is the military, generally they procure it from government accredited agencies. So there's usually very little detail that is required, at least for conventional arms. But for small arms and light weapons, these documentations, and then some background checks also done by National Police in coordination with other governments, with intergovernmental organizations, with Interpol, for example, whenever necessary. Importers and exporters, whether or not they import or export, if they do transit, transshipment, even brokering activities, they still have to get accreditation from customs, and that is passed on to the relevant implementing agency, such as for small arms, it's the National Police, and then conventional arms for the military. So that still requires some clearance from the responsible agencies. Just for sea, there isn't anything at the moment for air, although we are trying to upgrade that with the upcoming bill. For land, because we're surrounded by water, we're an archipelago, so nothing for land, but sea is the primary, the primary transit or transshipment medium for the Philippines.
Does your state apply risk assessment criteria to transit and/or transshipment authorizations?
At the moment, the risk assessment is very slim, but we are planning to upgrade that to something that is more specific, and not just the criteria or the risk assessment proposed in the ATT, but other export control regimes as well.
Does your state keep records of transit and/or transshipment authorizations? What information is contained in the records?
Yes, we keep records. We keep them for 10 years or more. The minimum is 10 years. If there is an outstanding case, and we never delete it forever and ever until the case is resolved. But yeah, we do keep records of transit and transshipment transactions or requests. Exporter or importer, the ones requesting the transit or transshipment transaction, the end user, whatever the end use is, the type of the item, the quantity, the model, and other details about the shipment, the country where it's from, the country of destination, and other details too.
What steps has your state taken to fulfill ATT obligations with regards to transit and/or transshipment?
There's an effort at the moment because in the Philippines there are many law enforcement agencies for specific issues. Like there's a law enforcement for drugs, there's law enforcement just for customs. The Justice Department has its own law enforcement arm. Then there's the National Police. There's law enforcement for transnational crime. So there's an effort to get all these agencies together and form a single network where it'd be easy, at least for those requesting, to channel the required documents for transit and transshipment requests. If there needs to be something that should be checked, like background, especially for the country of destination and the country of origin. So there's this interagency effort also that is being beefed up.
States must describe the measures that they take where necessary and feasible to regulate the transit and transshipment of conventional arms, including information on relevant legislation, which could be the same legislation for regulating arms transfers. This legislation may define the forms of transit or transshipment subject to regulation. Relevant agencies, which may or may not be the same as for regulating other arms transfers. Measures to regulate transit or transshipment. It's useful to indicate if all forms of transit are regulated, land, sea and air, or if different forms of regulation are in operation. And states are also encouraged to keep records of authorizations for transit and transshipment.